Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. With 2023 almost in the books, I wanted to stop and reflect by recapping my top 5 game releases from this year, along with taking some time to discuss an ever-expanding dichotomy in the industry between us, the players, and the game devs who work tirelessly to bring us these amazing experiences. Narrowing down your favorite games from an entire year into just a few top picks is never easy, but this task proved particularly difficult in 2023. With such an incredible lineup of AAA blockbusters, indie gems, and everything in between, deciding which games actually are the best of the best was no easy feat. And this is coming from a guy who didn't even get to play some of this year's best releases, as my massive backlog of shame can clearly attest. That being said, before I dive into things, I want to offer 2 quick but important disclaimers. As I go through my list, many of you will notice some pretty glaring omissions. Games like Baldur's Gate 3, Spider-Man 2, and Tears of the Kingdom, just to name a few. Before you whip out your pitchforks and torches, let me explain why many of this year's objectively best games aren't on my list. The reason, in fact, is quite simple. As much as I would have loved to play all of these amazing titles, I just didn't have the time. Giving each and every release in a given year their fair shake is always difficult, even for the most dedicated gamers among us. But in 2023, it was a truly Sisyphean task. Did I intentionally skip Baldur's Gate 3? This year's undisputed game of the year by all accounts, and the most anticipated game in perhaps the last decade? Did I want to miss out on another Cyberpunk 2077 playthrough when Phantom Liberty came around? Am I dissing Nintendo by not spending 200 plus hours clearing the entire map in Tears of the Kingdom? Obviously, the answer to each of these questions is no. These were all games I would have loved to play, and fully intend on revisiting when I do have the time, but dumping 100 plus hours into multiple titles would mean even less time spent playing other games, which is an unfortunate trade-off we all have to make sometimes. In that same vein, if you see a game on my list that you didn't play, didn't like, or absolutely hated, that's all good too. The beauty of gaming is that we can like what we like, but that doesn't mean we have to like what everyone else likes either. If you didn't vibe with the game on my list, or disagree with how high I've ranked it, I'd love to hear why in the comments below, but please keep the discussion respectful, and put down those torches and pitchforks like I mentioned before. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get into the good stuff. My top 5 games of 2023, and personal pick for Game of the Year. Before we get into the actual top 5, yes, I know I just said we were starting the list, but give me a minute here. I did want to shout out one honorable mention that didn't quite make the cut. There were a lot of great games this year that simply couldn't edge out the best of the best. Stuff like Warhammer 40k Bolt Gun, RoboQuest, and Starfield, to name a few. But one title that missed my cut just barely, and boy is this going to be a controversial one, was Diablo 4. For those of you who didn't watch my previous videos on it, I want to reiterate what I did back then. When it comes to Diablo, I'm a complete and total noob, and when I talk about the game, it's coming from that perspective. That's not to say I don't love the franchise, because I do. Diablo 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, actually, but I'm absolutely not a hardcore ARPG player. There were a lot of things I enjoyed during my time with Diablo 4, the main story being a high point in particular. But I completely understand that at launch, it was severely lacking for fans looking to grind their brains into mush by spending thousands of hours immersed in Sanctuary. That being said, Blizzard has done an excellent job of listening to community feedback, incorporating requested changes, and improving the hardcore grind. Thanks to all those updates, combined with the base game that was awesome for filthy casuals like myself, Diablo 4 has only gotten better since launch, and I'm hopeful the team over at Blizz will continue building on what they have already for years and years to come. And with that shout out of the way, let's finally get into my top 5 games of 2023. Kicking things off is Hi-Fi Rush, an incredible rhythm-based adventure that left me absolutely floored after wrapping it up. I'm somewhat ashamed to admit that this was the first title in its genre I'd ever played. I had, of course, heard plenty of good things about similar games, with Beat Saber being the cream of the crop, but I'd never gotten up the courage to actually try any of them out. The concept seemed foreign to me. Sure, I love music, and as someone who's moderately inclined when it comes to making and enjoying sick beats, in theory it sounded great, but in practice I just couldn't wrap my head around it. But when Tango Gameworks dropped Hi-Fi Rush on our heads back in January, I thought, hey, I'll download it off Game Pass and give it a shot. And man, am I so glad that I did. For starters, it's a pretty perfect entry into that genre, due to the fact that it's more forgiving than some of its contemporaries when it comes to staying on beat. Messing up your timings will throw things off and reduce your effectiveness in combat and traversal, but it doesn't smack you in the face with a brick wall, and thanks to some generous difficulty options, even the most rhythmically lacking individuals can enjoy this excellent package. The game's characters are endearing and hilarious, its combat fluid and addictive, and of course, the soundtrack is simply incredible. If you need convincing, just listen to Intruder by the Glass Pyramids and try telling me it isn't some of the sickest shit you've heard this year. All of the other aspects like story, exploration, collectibles, and customization gel together with that core package to create an unmissable entry. If you haven't played Hi-Fi Rush yet, I implore you to do so. Whether you're someone like me who's been hesitant to dive into the genre, or just skipped over it earlier this year and haven't had a chance to circle back, it is 100% worth a download on Game Pass or even a full price purchase. Next up, we have Dead Space. Now wait a minute, some of you might be saying. Can you really put a remake of a 2008 title in your Game of the Year list for 2023? Well, I'm here to tell you that yes, I can. But it certainly does fuel the ongoing conversation around remakes and how they should be judged against brand new releases. The original Dead Space is one of my all-time favorites, and was a formative experience for my gaming psyche when I first played it many years ago. It sparked my lifelong appreciation for games with horror, thriller, and other scary elements, and I fell completely in love with the franchise EA Redwood and Visceral crafted, despite plenty of missteps as the series eventually drew to a close. The 2023 remake was generally well done, faithful to its source material, excluding a few questionable character and plot changes, while fleshing out the terrifying corridors of the USG Ishimura with expanded content, improved graphics, and polished combat, all while retaining the same classic look and feel from the original. Before continuing on, I do think it's important to stop and acknowledge that discourse I mentioned earlier. How should remakes stack up against new, original titles in the grand scheme of things? Have developers leaned too far into remakes as cheap cash grabs? Or are they important vessels for taking beloved IPs and elevating them to modern standards, exposing entire generations to renowned titles they might have otherwise never played? Generally speaking, I tend to lean more towards the latter, on the condition the remakes are actually deserved and well executed. Dead Space 2023 is a shining example of how remakes should be conducted, remaining faithful to the source material, adding modernized gameplay systems and graphics, while expanding on the content already present in the original. For that reason, and the fact that it's simply a damn good game, it earned itself a spot on my list, and I really hope Motive has similar remakes for 2 and 3 in the works as well. In third place, we have Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon. For anyone who watched my review, you might be surprised to see it rank so high, or on my list at all, but let me assure you once again that I do, in fact, love this game, despite the qualms I had with it. Insanely annoying stagger mechanics aside, and yes, feel free to roast me with the usual get good comments, because I totally deserve it. I found Armored Core 6 to be quite unlike anything else released this year. The incredible feeling of piloting your AC, slicing through enemies like a knife through hot butter, and bringing down bosses after dozens upon dozens of rage-inducing attempts just wasn't replicated anywhere else. Sure, there were plenty of other releases with punishing difficulty, but the gameplay loop of constructing your perfect armored core, piloting it across the battlefield while wreaking destruction, and then heading back to base and getting ready to do it all over again was simply sublime. Beyond its exquisite moment-to-moment combat, AC6 also featured a plethora of complex, interwoven systems that further elevated the experience. And that doesn't even include PvP, which I was frankly way too scared to even dip my toes into. And I know some fans weren't too hot on it, but I actually enjoyed the game's story, with the ending I experienced serving as a perfect conclusion to the journey my version of Raven took across the fiery desolation of Rubicon 3. The characters I met along the way were memorable, my choices impactful, and the boss fights epic, even heart-wrenching at times, with all these factors resulting in an incredible product that earned its flowers every step of the way. FromSoft just doesn't miss, and they certainly nailed it once again with Armored Core 6. I am so glad the game got such a great reception, and I can't wait to not only go back and experience the other endings, but also see what FromSoft has in store for the franchise moving forward. Remnant 2 would have locked down the #1 spot by a large margin, had I not eventually gotten around to playing my actual game of the year, and the decision to bump it down a notch was anything but easy. As a huge fan of Remnant from the Ashes, the next installment was always going to hit high marks for me. I had nothing but confidence in Gunfire Games to deliver an incredible sequel, and, surprise surprise, they did just that. Everything I loved from the first game, the combat, the exploration, the build crafting, the atmosphere, the enemy and boss design, it all came back around in Remnant 2, but even bigger and better than before. After my first full clear playing on Veteran, which took me roughly 25 hours, I hopped right back in for some adventure mode runs and immediately realized that I had barely even scratched the game's surface. What's made Remnant 2 even better is, despite the base product already being exceptional, Gunfire has been constantly asking for player feedback and tweaking things based on these suggestions. And that doesn't even take into account the new content they've added on their own. With its first DLC already out, which I sadly haven't had a chance to try yet, and 2 more on the way, I have full faith that Remnant 2 will continue to improve and expand, building on an incredible package that I'll be revisiting whenever I get that itch for years and years to come. Well, we're finally here, the moment you've all been waiting for. Jay's Game of the Year pick for 2023. It might surprise some folks, but for me, even after playing all of the excellent titles I did this year, at the end of the day there was really only one possible winner: Alan Wake 2. Shamefully, I'm still working on my full review almost a month after beating it, but if anything, that goes to show just how much there is to talk about and how many praises there are to sing for what Remedy has crafted here. And believe me, there is plenty of praise to go around. 2023 was absolutely stacked with genre-defining and industry-shaking titles. Baldur's Gate 3 took the world by storm, reinvigorating the CRPG genre and introducing it to a massive audience that otherwise never would have touched that type of game. Sea of Stars, another excellent RPG from another awesome indie studio, snatched itself a well-deserved spot in this year's Best Games lineup, with delightful presentation, engaging characters, and enjoyable turn-based combat that accumulated both critical accolades and a dedicated fandom that continues to sing its praises long after release. And Starfield, despite its flaws and pitfalls, of which there are many, took the Bethesda formula to places it had never gone before. Although, the end result of this shift in the studio's vision remains to be seen. Despite all of these excellent, groundbreaking entries, none of them can quite compare to the sublime elevation of our medium that is Alan Wake 2, which blends an incredibly well-constructed video game with impeccable live-action content, resulting in a truly transformative experience. Alan Wake 2 is an excellent video game, there's no doubt about that. Visceral, brutal, and heart-pounding combat, terrifying horror sequences that permeate every segment, and a mind-bending story that will turn your brain inside out over and over again during its 20-plus hour runtime. And by its end, will have both you and the game's characters wholly unable to tell what's real and what isn't. Despite all of these excellent systems, Alan Wake 2 truly moves the needle in ways that no other release this year did. Not through its mind-bending plot or great gameplay, but through its elevation of the art form as we know it. Remedy has earned itself a reputation for unparalleled style and presentation in its games, and Alan Wake 2 is the ultimate culmination of this, a perfection that's taken place over the last 20 years. For those of us who watched the Game Awards this year, we were blessed with a phenomenal musical performance by Poets of the Fall, a Finnish rock band that moonlights as the old gods of Asgard, both at the Game Awards and in Alan Wake 2. Their musical performance at the award show was impeccable, but it doesn't even hold a candle to the visual and audio feast you'll experience during a single gameplay section of Alan Wake 2, and playing through that one sequence alone is worth the price of admission. If you haven't yet, you need to give it a try. Coming from someone who didn't play the original, and wasn't as big a fan of Control as many others were, this truly was the incredible Remedy experience I've heard so much about over the years, and it converted me into a lifelong fan of their work. Pushing the boundaries of what gaming can offer its fans in ways we've never really seen, Alan Wake 2 is, without a shadow of a doubt, my game of the year. Usually, I'd wrap things up on that note, but 2023 wasn't like most years. It was unusual not only with the quality and quantity of great games we got to play, but also the extreme cost that the developers of those games paid to get them into our hands. At the time this video goes live, estimates put the number of game dev jobs lost this year right around 9,000, and that number could be even higher based on additional cuts that haven't been fully reported. In what stands to reckon as one of the best years in gaming history, how can this dichotomy be explained? When we as players have been showered with 9 and 10 out of 10s every month, many of those unquestionable Game of the Year winners in any other timeline, how can we reckon with an industry that seems to be crumbling even as it pumps out phenomenal product after phenomenal product? It's not difficult to pinpoint the source of these troubles, and despite their various manifestations, they all seem to stem from the exact same thing: poor management by top-level executives. A prime example of this is Bungie, who suffered layoffs and pullbacks after upper management overprojected revenue targets and then failed to meet those inflated goals, resulting in a loss of jobs for some of the most well-known, forward-facing members of that studio. When questioned on whether leadership considered cutting their own compensation to stop this downward slide, employees were reportedly told that Bungie isn't that kind of company. I guess that means Bungie is the kind of company that's willing to coast on the hard work of its rank-and-file employees, with executives lining their pockets all while ignoring pleas to fix community concerns, at least until the cash cow dried up, and they are now faced with the prospect of being removed from power by Sony, with Bungie ceasing to exist as an independent entity altogether. For another example of corporate mismanagement, look no further than Embracer Group, whose expected acquisition, valued at a cool $2 billion, ultimately fell through, with plenty of game devs employed by the conglomerate paying the price. Several Embracer subsidiaries, Campfire Cabal, Goosebite, Volition, and Free Radical Design, were all shuttered as their parent company sought to stem the flow of blood that continues to pour after that purchase fell to pieces. Embracer still owns more than 100 game developers that employ around 15,000 individuals, including the likes of THQ Nordic, Saber Interactive, and Gearbox Entertainment. How many more of these studios and their employees will end up on the chopping block? How many more developers will lose their jobs before the bleeding stops, if this wound can be patched at all? This poisoning by management isn't confined to larger entities either, and even indie developers didn't emerge from 2023 unscathed. When engine maker Unity rolled out boneheaded policy changes with no prior warning or discussion, the thousands of devs using their products to create games were faced with the very real prospect of being run out of business by the company's newfound greed. While Unity did eventually revert those changes after widespread backlash, faith in their products has been forever shattered by the knowledge that a similar stunt might be pulled at any point down the line. A grim future for the hundreds of indie devs relying on those tools to create their games. And Unity itself wasn't able to weather the storm unscathed, announcing in November that they'd be cutting over 250 jobs from their workforce, even more employees who paid the price for their leadership's bad decisions. Beyond the troubling trend of poor management, studios were also hit with plenty of other obstacles this year as well. The live service phenomenon that has captivated gaming for nearly a decade, particularly on the multiplayer side, now seems to be cooling off, with potentially disastrous consequences. Destiny 2, once the poster child for how to run a successful live service venture, has been in freefall as Bungie struggles to address plummeting player count and reduced spending. Sony's push into live service, meant to be spearheaded by their acquisition of Bungie back in 2022, is also floundering on a larger scale. Naughty Dog's Last of Us Factions-esque live service shooter has now been scrapped after years of work, not too long after Bungie, ironically now on the hot seat themselves, declared the game not quite good enough for their lofty standards. And despite some successes like the finals, which still has a long, long road ahead if it wants to remain viable in today's saturated market, games like it are the exception, not the norm. How many corpses of failed live service ventures litter the road to success that so few games are able to traverse? Will companies continue chasing the endless money fountain that Bungie once appeared to have as Destiny 2 struggles just to survive? As the live service path to profitability appears to be in decline, single-player games are facing their own identity crisis. Spider-Man 2, an undeniable critical success, is reported to have cost nearly 3 times as much as the first game to make, a massive increase in development costs. Ballooning budgets aren't a Sony-specific problem either. Across the industry, games continue to become more expensive and time-consuming to make. Cyberpunk 2077's Phantom Liberty expansion, combined with various updates to improve the base game, was seen as a triumphant victory lap for the long-lambasted title, and rightfully so. That success didn't come cheap, however, with the price tag of Cyberpunk's final form glow-up costing CD Projekt Red upwards of $400 million. As someone who's loved Cyberpunk 2077 for a long, long time, I'm beyond ecstatic to see it finally reach the peaks it was always meant to. But that type of investment into every large-scale single-player experience just isn't realistic. Bad luck for game devs doesn't stop with their budgets either. Various companies have also been hit with hacks and leaks, exposing critical information concerning upcoming releases, existing titles, and even personal employee data. Rockstar's GTA 6 trailer, perhaps the single most anticipated piece of media released across gaming this year, was leaked early, forcing the studio's hand as they aired the trailer before they were actually ready to. As if that wasn't enough, barely a month later, the entire source code for GTA 5 was leaked online. Yet another hit against the company in what should have been one of the most exciting times of its existence. Even more devastating was the hack that took place at Spider-Man developer Insomniac, which resulted in the airing of personal employee info, a roadmap for future releases, and even a playable build of their upcoming Wolverine game, albeit in a very early state. It's hard to imagine the pain those employees are feeling in the wake of this illegal attack. None of that information should have seen the light of day until Insomniac was ready to release it, but it's now out there for everyone to see. A genie that's quite literally impossible to put back into its lamp. Game developers are under siege, and in a year packed to the brim with more excellent games than there is time to play them, how can we really enjoy these incredible experiences while knowing that the people who work so hard to create them have suffered so much, and will likely continue to suffer in the future as well? So, where do we as an industry go from here? Only time will tell, but as the costs of making games continues to rise, and the live service avenue of monetization grows more and more perilous, it seems gaming as a whole has reached a philosophical crossroads. And it remains to be seen how this intersection between profitability and sustainability can be successfully navigated. It's quite clear already that 2024, and likely the next several years after, won't come close to matching the sheer scale of excellent titles that graced our computers, handhelds, and consoles this past year. As the industry continues to reckon with financial viability, how will a period without all those great titles selling like hotcakes affect the already precarious position many companies find themselves stuck in? Unfortunately, I have a sinking feeling that things won't get much better, at least in the immediate future. And like the esports bubble that's collapsed upon itself over the last couple of years, gaming may have a similarly painful course correction in store. Despite that bleak outlook, I also have faith that things will get better, eventually. Gaming will endure, as it always has since its earliest days. Already the most valuable media industry in the world, it will find its way to being both profitable and stable. Of that I am sure. There are profitable, sustainable, and respected developers out there already. Just look at Larian Studios, a shining beacon of hope in the often desolate development landscape. A completely independent outfit with over 400 employees that managed to put out the best RPG in recent memory, all while supporting and empowering their workers along the way. Some might argue that Larian's business practices aren't sustainable, and the studio's own employees have spoken on the struggles they faced over the years. But at the end of the day, they banded together and worked their asses off to create the best game of 2023, and their story doesn't have to be an almost unheard of miracle. The biggest questions to face now are how exactly will our industry get to that better future? How long will it take for us to reach those goals? And how many hardworking developers will lose their livelihoods before we get there? As we all sit back and relax, work on cleaning out the last of our backlog, and prepare for yet another year of exciting releases and concerning industry practices, I'd implore each and every one of you to stop for a moment and appreciate the golden age of gaming that we live in, and the difficult sacrifices so many game developers have made to make all of this possible. Only through their dedication, passion, and creativity are we blessed with so many excellent titles, especially in 2023. Whether they work for a massive publisher, a third-party company, or are a simple one-man band, nurturing an indie passion project in their spare time, those who dedicate their lives to developing games deserve our support and respect as they continue to deliver unforgettable experiences that we will look back on fondly forever. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more gaming content, and let me know what your favorite game from 2023 was in the comments below. Happy New Year to you all. I can't thank everyone enough for the support on the channel this year, and I can't wait to continue pushing forward in 2024. You're a real one and I appreciate you. Catch you later, homies.